Today I was reminded about language and how important it is for communication, especially within civil engineering, because we are sometimes talking about the same thing, but we use slightly different words and phrasings, which can change the message quite substantially. So here's an example. We're working with a hotel, a brand new hotel, where we have guest rooms that are on top of each other, and we need to have some kind of sound insulation regarding impact sound, walking sound between the rooms. And a typical way to solve this when you have a concrete structure is that you have like the building frame here, and so then the walls, and then you have another guest room down there. And you need to do some kind of treatment to the surface here, because if you have someone walking up here on the solid concrete, there's going to go a lot of energy into the frame, building frame here, and it's going to be radiated down here to the guests below. And we don't want that. We want to stop that. So one way of doing this is to construct a floating floor. And what that means is that, in principle, you use an elastic layer here, an impact sound insulation mat, like so, and you can fold it up towards the edges. And then you pour a concrete screed in here. So the concrete screed is like floating. It has no contact with the walls or the floor below it. And that way, when someone is walking up here, the noise, the structure-borne sound will stay inside the screed, and it's not going to be radiated down here. So this is fine. But then I got this email from the architect, and I read, yeah, I noticed in your acoustic documentation that you had proposed a floating floor. I just want to let you know that we're not having a floating floor in these rooms. We're going to have a wooden floor with parquets that are glued to the concrete. And I almost spit my coffee on the computer screen. At least mentally I did that, because, oh, no, because this project has gone quite far. And I said, no, this can't be true, because we need impact sound insulation. I was like, are you serious? No, don't tell me that this is a solid connection. But it turns out that our little language challenge here is because when you do this solution, you can put whatever floor finish here that you want. You could use what's it called? A hard surface floor, just mount it straight on top here, or you can glue a wooden floor or do whatever, because you got this seal that's gonna stop the sound transmission. But what the architect meant was that in principle it's the same, that when you have a parquet floor, like you often do in apartments or dwellings and hotel rooms too, perhaps, for that matter, is that you also had some kind of soft layer. Oh, that's too thin. Let's thicken it up a bit. A soft layer, and then you put your parquet floor on top. But this one is like 15 millimeters, so it's quite thin. And this was what the architect meant with a floating floor. And in that way, we don't have a floating floor here, because the parquet is going to be mounted solidly on top here. But here's an interesting difference. We were both speaking about floating floors, whereas I, as an acoustician, consider this is like two types of floating floor. They're both floating floors, whereas the architect was thinking about this one as a floating floor, and this one was perhaps called something different. And I've seen this little language challenge a couple of other times. It could be like when we're talking about sound insulation in walls or floor structures, that if you have like gypsum layers like so, and you have some mineral wool inside the wall cavity like this. And then I used to say that the hard currency for an acoustician is the air gap, the luftspalt in Swedish. This distance in here is what I'm really concerned about, that if we increase this one, we will get better sound insulation, and if we decrease it, it's the sound insulation typically becomes less. But then when you talk with other disciplines, then the air gap, if you take it literally, then this would be the air gap. But for me, air gap is including the mineral wool, whereas another engineer might consider the actual air gap with air to be the air gap. So it's I don't blame them. It's not that obvious, but it's clearly important that we learn to speak the same language and use proper terms, because there's ample opportunity for miscommunication and misunderstandings here. And another thing, I mean, when I'm talking with structural engineers, I could say that this must not be connected. That's very important to me. And they say, sure, yes, no worries, it's not connected. But they might be thinking, with regards to the structural loads, it's not connected. I mean, it's like a flexible connection and it doesn't take any torque or forces or stuff like that. But still, if they touch, then in my world, it's just the fact that they're touching each other, then it's connected. Whereas for the structural engineer, that they might consider that that's two separate constructions. So there's another little of these language difficulties that I've come across. So we should be careful with our words, and that's why I love this little whiteboard of mine, so I can draw pictures and explain. I use this one all the time in my Teams meetings and Zoom meetings when I'm talking with my clients and helping them out, because nothing can beat a pen when it comes to explanation. I guess I'm a bit analog and old school in that regard. And in today's video, I'm wearing patterns. So let's have a little crash course about patterns as well. Because I have a pattern shirt, I got patterns on my jacket, and there's a little bit of pattern here on the pocket square as well. So the mirroring is quite challenging to figure out how it works. So the thing that you need to remember if you're using pattern stuff, that if you have, they shouldn't be too close to each other. Let's say I have a window pane, this pattern, on my shirt, and I have it on my jacket, and then I would have window pane pattern on other garments as well. They would not harmonize because they would be slightly different, and if they are close to each other, it's gonna look weird. But here, if you look at the shirt, you have kind of a window pane pattern, but it's 45-degree angle, and they're much smaller than the big squares out here, and that way it can work. So be careful when you pattern matching is really fun, but it's also a bit more difficult because you have to be careful so they don't clash with each other. And it's the same thing with colors. When you have a suit, you need to have the same fabric both in the jacket and the pants and the vest, because if they are slightly different, it's not harmonized. It's gonna look weird. And the same goes for patterns. They should be either exactly the same or far enough apart. But I would not recommend to use a shirt and a jacket with exactly the same pattern, because that would look really strange. When I say that you should have exactly the same, I would consider it like a suit with a pants and a jacket and a vest. You could have a pattern, exactly the same fabric on all of them, and that would be just fine. And then use contrast, basically. That's the secret. Have a nice day. See you later.